What does it mean to have it all? Is it a private island in the Caribbean? A fleet of Rolls-Royces, each one a different color? Is it a priceless collection of jewels so heavy they can barely be worn? Or is it marrying not one, but two of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world? By every measure, Nenah Dyer had it all. She was one of the most photographed, most desired, and most outrageously wealthy women of her time, a real-life Cinderella who went from obscurity to unimaginable luxury. So why, at the age of just 35, did she end her own life, alone in her Parisian mansion, with only a final, heartbreaking note? The world saw the diamonds, the princes, and the fairy tale. But behind the dazzling facade was a story of profound loneliness, of a woman who was treated like a priceless object, and who ultimately came to believe that was all she was. This is the tragic, forgotten story of Nenah Dyer, the woman who was showered with everything money could buy except for the one thing she desperately needed to survive. To understand the woman Nenah became, you have to go back to a place and a time that seems a world away from the glittering salons of post-war Europe. She was born Nenah Sheila Dyer in 1930, not in London or Paris, but in colonial Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Her father was a British tea planter, a man of modest standing in the rigid hierarchy of the British Empire. Her mother was a local woman, and in that single fact lay the first quiet complication of Nenah's life. Growing up as a mixed-race child in a colonial society was to exist in a state of ambiguity. She was never truly part of the British ruling class, nor was she fully integrated into local society. This early experience of being an outsider, of not quite belonging, may have been the very thing that ignited in her an all-consuming ambition to not just belong, but to conquer the very pinnacle of the society that held her at arm's length. After the Second World War, a teenage Nenah and her mother moved to England. The gray ration book reality of post-war Britain was a stark contrast to the tropical world she had known. But London was also a city of opportunity, blessed with an extraordinary, almost otherworldly beauty, huge expressive eyes, a perfect figure, and an air of exotic mystery. She quickly found work as a model. She became a muse for the great couturiers of the day, like Pierre Balmain and Christian Dior. She wasn't just wearing the clothes, she was embodying a dream of glamour and escapism that a war-weary world was desperate for. She moved to Paris, the epicenter of this new world of high fashion and high society. It was here that she learned the unwritten rules of survival. She saw how beauty could be a currency, how the right connections could open any door. She wasn't just a model anymore. She was crafting a persona. She was becoming a fixture in the jet set, that new breed of international socialites who moved effortlessly between Paris, the Riviera, and New York, their lives a whirlwind of parties, polo matches, and extravagant gestures. It was a world built on surfaces, on appearances, and Nenah's appearance was flawless. It was only a matter of time before her beauty would attract the attention of a man who could offer her the world on a silver platter. That man was Baron Hans Heinrich Heine von Thyssen-Bornemisza. He wasn't just rich. He was the heir to one of Europe's greatest industrial fortunes, a man whose wealth was almost impossible to comprehend. He was an art collector, a bon vivant, and when he saw Nenah Dyer, he was utterly captivated. For Thyssen, who already owned a world-class collection of old masters, Nenah was the ultimate masterpiece, a living work of art he had to possess. His courtship was the stuff of legends, a relentless bombardment of luxury. He didn't send flowers, he sent entire greenhouses. He didn't just buy her jewelry, he bought her a solid gold charm bracelet from which dangled a tiny jewel-encrusted replica of every car he owned. When she admired a black panther at a zoo, he bought her two, which she named Baby and Ichi. They became her constant companions, draped in diamond collars, lounging in the passenger seats of her convertible. The press was enthralled. Here was a fairy tale in the making, the beautiful model of mysterious origins, and the fabulously wealthy industrialist. Their wedding in 1954 was an opulent spectacle, but it was the wedding gifts that truly cemented the legend. As a present, Thyssen gave her a private island in the Caribbean. He bought her a 17th century chateau outside Paris. He filled her garages with custom-built sports cars and Rolls-Royces. And of course, there were the jewels, ropes of pearls, cascades of diamonds, enormous emeralds and rubies. On the surface, it was a dream come true. But there was a strange, almost transactional nature to the relationship. Thyssen himself once admitted, "I was fascinated by her beauty. I was young. I had never seen a woman as beautiful as her." He spoke of her as a collector speaks of a prize acquisition. For Nenah, this was the ultimate validation. She had climbed to the very top. She was no longer the outsider from Ceylon. She was the Baroness von Thyssen, a woman who commanded headlines and envy in equal measure. But the fairy tale began to crumble almost as soon as it began. The life of a baroness was not the life Nenah had imagined. It was a life of formal dinners, rigid protocol, and constant scrutiny. The man who had pursued her with such obsessive passion now seemed more interested in his business dealings and his art collection. The gifts, it seemed, were a substitute for genuine intimacy and connection. The Black Panthers became her confidants. They were wild, beautiful, and utterly devoted to her. In them, she seemed to find the unconditional love that was absent from her human relationships. An acquaintance from that time remarked that she seemed more at ease with her panthers than with her husband. The marriage, built on the unstable foundations of obsession and acquisition, lasted just 2 years. The divorce was as spectacular as the wedding. Nenah walked away with a settlement that made her an independently wealthy woman. She kept the chateau, the cars, and a staggering collection of jewelry. But she had also learned a valuable, if painful, lesson that being possessed is not the same as being loved. She was free, she was rich, but she was once again completely alone. But her story was far from over. Her next conquest would take her even higher, into the rarefied world of royalty itself. In 1957, just a year after her divorce, Nenah married again, and this time it was to a prince. Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan was the son of the Aga Khan III, the spiritual leader of millions of Ismaili Muslims. He was a sophisticated, Harvard-educated diplomat, a man of immense charm, culture, and of course extraordinary wealth. For Nenah, this was the final rung on the social ladder. She had gone from model to baroness and now to princess. This marriage demanded more from her than the last. She converted to Islam, taking the name Shirin, which means sweetness. She traded the wild extravagance of her life with Thyssen for a more restrained, dignified role as the wife of a future global leader. She was now Her Highness Princess Shirin Aga Khan. The name on her passport had changed, her religion had changed, but the fundamental dynamic of her life had not. Once again, she was showered with gifts. The prince reportedly paid over $1 million just to buy back a particularly magnificent diamond necklace from her previous collection that she had been forced to part with. He gave her a magnificent home in Geneva and a villa on the French Riviera. He introduced her to a world of diplomacy, art, and philanthropy, but the pressures were immense. The Aga Khan family was international royalty, and Nenah was constantly under the microscope. Friends noted a change in her. The playful, if sometimes reckless spirit she had with Thyssen was replaced by a more guarded, almost fragile quality. The emotional distance that had defined her first marriage seemed to haunt her second. The prince was often consumed by his duties, traveling the world for his work with the United Nations, and Nenah once again was left alone in a gilded cage. There is a poignant little-told story from this period. During a formal event, a guest, trying to make conversation, asked the princess what she did with her time. Nenah is said to have looked at the woman with her large, sad eyes and replied simply, "I wait." It was a devastatingly honest admission. Her life was a series of passive moments, waiting for her husband to return, waiting for the next party, waiting for something to fill the profound emptiness that all the jewels and titles could not. This marriage also ended in divorce in 1962. Once again, the settlement was astronomical. Some reports claimed she received what would be the equivalent of over $25 million today. At just 32 years old, Nenah Dyer was now one of the wealthiest self-made women in the world. She had successfully leveraged her beauty into a fortune that most people could only dream of. She had won the game, but what happens when you win and you realize the prize was worthless? After her second divorce, Nenah retreated from the world that had made her a star. She settled into her chateau outside Paris and her mansion in the city's exclusive 16th arrondissement. She had the freedom and the funds to do anything she wanted. She could have traveled, started a business, become a patron of the arts. But she did none of those things. Instead, her isolation deepened. The vibrant, ambitious girl who had conquered Paris was gone, replaced by a phantom living in a gilded prison of her own making. Her days fell into a strange, reclusive ritual, a silent routine played out against a backdrop of unimaginable wealth. Imagine the mornings in her mansion, the heavy silence broken only by the ticking of an antique clock. Sunlight would stream through tall French windows, illuminating dust motes dancing over priceless furniture that no one ever sat on. She would rise late, cared for by a silent staff who knew not to intrude, to ask too many questions. Her world, once a whirlwind of couture fittings, flashbulbs, and grand balls, had shrunk to the confines of these exquisitely decorated lonely rooms. Her truest companions remained her animals. The famous panthers were gone. By now they had become too large and dangerous to keep as house pets, and were moved to a private zoo. But her need for their uncomplicated affection was greater than ever. She filled the void with a new menagerie, a flock of exotic birds whose bright colors were a stark contrast to the gray melancholy of the house, and a pack of devoted dogs who followed her from room to room like a small furry court. Her only real emotional connections were with creatures who could offer devotion without judgment, love without complication. One can picture her in the evenings, dressed in a silk robe, not speaking to another human soul for hours on end, but whispering her secrets and her sorrows into the soft ear of a loyal greyhound. These creatures were the only living things that didn't want anything from her other than her presence. They didn't care about her jewels or her titles. They simply responded to her touch, and for Nenah, that was perhaps the only real love she had ever known. This is the central mystery of Nenah Dyer. Was she a cold, calculating courtesan who saw marriage as a career and men as stepping stones? Or was she a deeply wounded soul, a woman who never recovered from the feeling of being an outsider, and who sought security in the most tangible things she could find? Money and jewels? The truth is, likely somewhere in between. She was undoubtedly shrewd. She understood the power of her beauty and used it to secure her future. In a world where women had few avenues to power, She used the one she had with masterful skill. You have to admire the nerve of a woman who, with nothing but her wits and her looks, managed to acquire a fortune that royalty would envy. But there is too much evidence of her profound sadness to dismiss her as a simple gold digger. She was a product of a society that objectified women, that celebrated their beauty while remaining indifferent to their inner lives. Both of her husbands, in their own words, admitted to being first and foremost captivated by her appearance. She was acquired, adorned, and displayed. When the novelty wore off, she was left to her own devices. She learned that a diamond necklace is not a hug, and a new car is not a conversation. The tragedy is that she spent her life collecting receipts for affection, but never received the affection itself. Each jewel, each car, each lavish gift was a transaction. It was payment for her beauty, for her companionship, but it was never a true offering of the heart, and a heart cannot survive on transactions alone. Her mysterious past likely played a crucial role in this tragic dynamic. The girl from Ceylon, with her ambiguous heritage, would have felt like an outsider in the rigid, ancient hierarchies of European high society. No matter her title, she was not one of them. The jewels, the chateau, the Rolls-Royces, they were perhaps a kind of armor. They were tangible proof that she belonged, a way to build a wall against the whispers and the condescending looks. She used wealth to create a persona, a character, baroness, princess, that was impenetrable. The devastating irony is that the armor worked too well. It protected her from scorn, but it also prevented any genuine human warmth from getting through. One of the most striking and tragic quotes attributed to her comes from this final period of her life. Speaking to one of her few remaining friends, she allegedly gestured to the vault where she kept her jewels and said, "All this, and I am the unhappiest person I know." She had built a fortress of wealth around herself, but she had locked herself inside it, alone. The loneliness became unbearable, and the depression that had shadowed her for years began to take over completely. Imagine the crushing weight of that realization. She had won the game. By every external metric the world offered, she was a supreme success. But in the quiet of her own heart, she knew she had failed in the one pursuit that truly mattered. The freedom she possessed was a paradox, with unlimited funds and no obligations. She had the freedom to do anything, which for a person with no sense of self becomes the terrifying freedom to do nothing. Her days were empty canvases she had no colors to fill. Her staff reported that in her final months, she grew even more withdrawn. The rare trips into Paris ceased. The phone calls went unanswered. She would spend hours just sitting, staring out at the manicured gardens of her chateau, a place designed for joy and entertainment that now felt like a beautiful, silent tomb. The vibrant energy that had once lit up rooms had dimmed to a flicker. It was the slow, painful fading of a star that had burned too brightly, too quickly, and was now collapsing under its own weight, leaving only a cold, dark void behind. The final chapter of Nenah's story is brief and devastating. In the summer of 1965, she made a series of quiet preparations. She drew up a will, a document that would reveal the true priorities of her heart. She left the vast majority of her vast fortune, the money, the houses, the art, the cars, and all the jewels, to causes dedicated to the protection of animals. Not a single penny was left to a person. Her final act was a gesture of love towards the only creature she felt had ever truly loved her back. On July 15, 1965, in her luxurious Parisian home, Nenah Dyer's body was discovered. She had taken a fatal overdose of sleeping pills 2 days prior. Beside her was a short, simple note addressed to her last lover. It read, "I am going to end my life. I cannot bear it any longer. Forgive me. I love you. She was 35 years old. The news of her death shocked the world. How could a woman who had everything, youth, beauty, and limitless wealth, choose to end it all? But her story holds a timeless and haunting significance. She is a tragic archetype, a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of materialism and the profound human need for genuine connection. Her life was a spectacle, played out on the world stage, but her death was a deeply private tragedy. She serves as a stark reminder that happiness is not a commodity that can be purchased. It cannot be found in a vault or on a private island. Nenah Dyer was treated as the most beautiful object in a world that worshipped beautiful objects. But objects, no matter how priceless, cannot love you back. And a life without love, without purpose, without a sense of self beyond what you own, can become an impossibly heavy burden to bear. In the end, perhaps the most tragic thing about Nenah Dyer's story is how little she seemed to value herself. She amassed a fortune in jewels, but could never see the jewel within. She spent her short life seeking validation from powerful men, hoping their status would fill the void inside her, only to find that it widened it. When you build your entire identity on being desired, you are left with nothing when that desire inevitably fades. Her sense of self was borrowed, never truly owned. This heartbreaking truth was laid bare in her final act. Her will left the vast majority of her spectacular fortune, not to friends or family, but to the cause of animal welfare. In death, she turned away from the human world that had adorned her yet left her so empty, giving everything back to the silent, loyal creatures who had offered her uncomplicated affection. It was a final, poignant statement about where she had found solace and where she had found pain. Her legacy, therefore, is not in the headlines she created or the fortune she left behind. It is in the quiet, unsettling questions her life forces us to ask. What is the true measure of a life? And what is the human cost of a world that so often confuses price with value? Nenah Dyer's story is a heartbreaking whisper from the past, reminding us that the most precious things in life, a sense of purpose and a true human connection, are the ones that can never be bought and are all too easily lost.